Alright, reality video number 2. Subject of the controlling mechanism. Really just about the crap. Consumption, reproduction, addiction, and parasitism. Yes. Yeah, so what the controller mechanism, what the behavioral mechanism that makes the reproduction thing happen, which makes the sustainability of this form of matter being driven into this shape or configuration of possession. Matter being possessed not only first by the little cells and then possessed by the colony organism. And one could argue that there might be some possibility or some way of imagining that even our social structures could gain enough complexity to become organism-like. Which I would say, if you argued it through, probably wouldn't be practically attainable, just because we're made of hundreds of billions of elements, and I don't think a civilization could gain a structure, the light speed communication kind of thing, almost all the kind of necessary mechanical elements to allow for it to become an organism. There's probably some sort of reasons why that just can't happen, but save that for a different video if necessary, which probably isn't necessary just because it has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with fantasies, imagined possibilities. So anyway, getting back to the core of it. So yeah, there's no point, I don't think, in going into any elaborate description about the necessity for the biological function, for the purpose of the genetic replication and the continuation of the living organism, the possession of matter, the acquisition of matter and its possession in this form, of the two fundamental elements of consumption and reproduction, and the other two elements, addiction and how the addiction is made practical. Yeah, you end up being addicted to the taking, finding a way of grabbing the material energy required, the matter and energy required to make copies. Which would be, in, I would argue, a parasitic form, because it's just, you're more likely to win that way. Building it from scratch is really expensive, so it's really easy for an organism to just steal something that's already made, like a car that's already built, rather than trying to build your own car. That kind of thing. It's just this obvious advantage to just stealing it from some other living thing that's already made has all the parts collected for you. Alright, so for humans, for a lot of organisms on the planet, big ones anyway, brains are where this, you have to have one to do the addiction thing. So that's, I guess, the most substantial element of this crap in terms of the behavior would be just the mechanism of your attachment, your addictions, the motivating force. And that's sort of gets into a conversation related to this whole value argument, but I'm just going to try to go through the mechanical part of it. And so I have tried to reduce consciousness to its most basic elements, and I'll try to do that some more here. I haven't really gone through this except in my own imagination, so we'll see how it plays out. So yeah, I apologize, this video isn't going to be quite as tight as I'd like it to be, but it will be fixed in version 1.2 or something. Anyway, so again, the axioms are, I think, indisputable, the few that I'm putting forward. The evolutionary mechanism, the mechanism relies on this, the fact that the genetic code is mutated through time, and the mutations that are beneficial get kept, and it's basically just doing this consumption thing, and the consumption makes it possible to do the reproduction. You have to collect the parts before you can build your new copy. And then your parts need to be efficiently put back into the system in some way that's usually or hopefully beneficial to your own kind. So it's something like the salmon, you might argue, where the parents, go upstream to lay their eggs, and they go through this elaborate process to do that because it provides this secondary benefit that their dead corpses will particularize, and by the time those pieces get to the lake that the little salmon will be growing in, those pieces are now consumable. It's far enough away from being direct cannibalism. Not that that's against the law in nature at all. There's lots of circumstances where that's part of the game, where the cannibalism is more direct. But clearly, it's a benefit. You're feeding, you're putting your body directly into the stream, and the stream will feed your young, and so you can see the evolutionary rationale of it, the reasonableness of this as a survival mechanism, as a way of playing the game. So anyway, back to the brainy animals, the ones with the bigger brains. So, fish were where it started in terms of being smart things, and those smart things came on land, and they became us through this evolution process. And the brain was already, in a sense, created in terms of its basic function. The function was to allow the organism to learn, but also have conditioned impulses. Fish don't understand why they're swimming upstream. They just understand that it feels good to do that. It's a feeling necessity. They're driven to it. It's very attractive. It's sexy from their perspective. The going that way feels better than going that way kind of circumstance. And that's sort of how we live our lives, is our brain provides us with some sort of mechanism that makes one choice feel better than another choice. And that's the choice we make. That's the decision made by our brain. And I will argue that it's just made through a simple process of association. That what your brain is basically doing is it's feeling the world. And those feelings are what are getting weighed in your subconscious and conscious mind. The consciousness just provides the bucket that holds the mixture while it's being weighed. It's the scale, might even argue, but it's not an active participant. It's a dead mechanism that just allows for the image to be created, and then the image to be reacted to. And it's just this kind of a feedback mechanism. So I would argue that everything's just association. And so there's, by fundamental design, by the crude conditioning, there's a association between certain events and a feeling. So I could say that, pinching my skin hard, I will have a sensation. The sensation is provide more and more pressure, will get more and more unpleasant. And that there are certain physical dispositions like that are automatically end up us associating some sort of penetration of our body as being a negative thing, even though we might not necessarily have ever experienced a certain kind of experience. We'll be able to associate long knife with short knives with thick knives. We'll know that knives are all knifey. We'll be able to put things in categories and understand that they're all capable of doing this harm thing, making this damage that we have associated with a negative experience, even though it may not be a negative experience. There are penetrations like a needle, in the hands of a competent technician it's a non-event. You won't even experience it as if it didn't happen at all, and yet there's a penetration of your skin, something that you could, and many people will just react to the look of it. The very sight of it tells them that something bad is happening, when if they went by the sensations alone, there's nothing bad happening at all. There's nothing to see here. Yet their brain is associating it with knives that are a foot long. It's associating it with experiences and events in their life where this thing was monstrous and horrible or unpleasant. So again, I guess the premise when I just said the word unpleasant, it just reminds me that I have to emphasize that that's one of these mechanisms we have. Okay, that we have these sensations, and they're on the one that we know for certain is the one that's decidedly negative. And then we know for certain that when you take away a decided negative, it can be decidedly positive. It feels good to eliminate misery or a headache, whatever the pain is. When it goes away, there is a sense of euphoria, a kind of a reboot, like a sneeze. It could be argued to be a kind of mental reboot. The brain is just cleansed for a little while of whatever's in it, and yeah, you're given that little moment of little tiny moment of euphoria, where there's no pressure, there's no sense of this negative. The negative's been flushed, and now it must seep back in again. And so the mechanism right there, you have enough of a mechanism in terms of a value generating device. It generates the negative, and then it fixes the negative, and the fixing feels like a positive. So you really only need the whip to create a carrot and whip scenario, in the sense that the carrot doesn't really exist. The carrot's an image of the whip being taken away. So in a sense, you only need to have the whip. I'm not arguing that there's no carrot. I'm just arguing that for the sake of argument, the one that we know exists is the negative. I think everyone could agree. They know what a negative state of being is, and they know that there is a positive sense, a felt sense of positive when the negative is removed. And I don't think I have to get elaborate about how it's like I could break your limbs or something, and then if in one instant I repaired everything, you would sense this great peace when all of this flood of negative feelings was removed. But I don't. There are people who are going to argue this isn't a real thing happening, but I'm not going to waste time with that. So I'm just going to assume this is a common experience that you share with me, that you have these very unpleasant sensations, and that it feels good when they're removed. And that's basically the mechanism of our psychology. So what our brain is doing is that it has these innate ones. So I would argue the innate ones are obviously the physical, the way your sense organs are feeling in terms of the physical bodily defense mechanisms. Then you can understand that if there's a disease or an infection, that creates pressure on little nerve endings, that the nerve endings sense it as if it was a knife or some other penetrating object, and that reacts as if you have been stabbed, when no, you just have an infection. And so you have this pain sensation, and there's no knife to remove, and you can't, and it can be very uncomfortable and cause a great deal of negative sensation, even though there's no direct purpose, in the sense that there's nothing it's a defense mechanism that's working against you, in the sense that the sensations don't do you any good, in the sense that there's nothing you can do about your behavior or about the problem in any kind of practical way. You can't reach in and soothe an infected gallbladder or something. So whatever pain or discomfort you feel is pretty much useless. But what the body's doing isn't stupid. It's just that it's a crude system, and it's not very sophisticated, and it can't tell when the pain isn't doing you any good. So there are times when you will feel pain where it doesn't serve any purpose but to disrupt your ability to do something about it. But it's a crude system. So anyway, the first part is that physical part, the physical defense mechanism. Then we have this second level, which is our maturation. We take a long time to mature, and our brain is programmed through that process of giving us a little taste of experience. And you can see that with any kind of mammal as it grows up. It learns about the world it exists in, and it learns uniquely based on the world it exists in. If it lives on a mountain or it lives in a prairie, it lives in different places, it will adapt to that world and the dangers of that world and the things that may harm it, and it will have fears that are relevant to that environment, the life in that environment. So you can almost argue that the person living in the very cushy, rich, plush life becomes obsessed with little minor defects in their world, and they're at the end of the world, and they have to get plastic surgery, or they have to do this, or they have to do that. And then you have the homeless person who's living in some other world where you can't scare him with those little encumbrances. You have to scare him with something, much bigger and grander, because their life is much more brutal, and they're much more conditioned to rocks. You have to stab them with knives to actually hurt them in a way. But we all conditioned to different environments, we all end up with conditioned sensibilities. And what those sensibilities are basically made out of is just the associations. So I would say through your conditioning you will acquire, some of these are innate. So you could argue that, it might be argued that we have an innate discomfort when it comes to cliffs, edges, spiders maybe, snakes, certain images. It seems they are burned into our psychology from birth, and that would make some evolutionary sense, where there's no such thing as the good snake, the snake that's going to do you a favor. And so all snakes are basically worth avoiding because we can't get anything from them. None of them have buckets of gold. There's nothing a human's really going to derive from a snake except a risk. And so it would make sense that our brain generically would just take snakes off the table and say, don't even mess with those. And they could argue that with bugs, it's the same kind of thing. Very few human-friendly bugs. Sorry. Very few human-friendly bugs. So yes, creepy, crawly, buggy things, brain, give it an innate discomfort with anything doing that bug creepy thing. And loud noises, different things like this. This may be, these are, built-in things to avoid. Hide, shudder, do some sort of physical reaction that we have to those kind of events. Really obnoxious smells, another built-in kind of thing. And some of that's now conditioned, though. So on this higher, you have this crude mechanism, and then your brain reinforces that stuff, or else you overcome that innate conditioning. So yes, through maturation, you can get over a fear of snakes because you associate with them, find them not unpleasant, and through that association, you you overwhelm the innate conditioning and relieve yourself of that fear, that innate repulsion or aversion, negative feeling. So you replace it with a positive associations and positive sensations. So anyway, so in our maturation we are conditioned by the environment to find how we will gain our satisfaction. And it seems that we are conditioned in some way to be social animals in the sense of familial, and that would have value. So it can be understood that there would be value in people being networked with each other and functioning as gangs of different sizes. The family gang, the community gang, the national gang, that this is a part of the mechanism of our associations and conditioning, that we would have these affiliations, we would pay greater attention to those like ourselves rather than those unlike ourselves. And this is the derivative of our bigotries and our corruption as a reasoning device, just because our associations are blinded by that innate tendency to associate, to be indoctrinated into a culture, into a a way of life with those among us, those common to us, and we associate these as all good things and anything foreign as bad things, things that behave differently than the things we're used to. So I guess that would be a best way to put it, is we become comfortable with routine, comfortable with tradition, comfortable with something, I'm not going to say it's monotonous because we don't find it tedious, but with a structure. And we tend to not like change. Generally speaking, in a crude way, we don't like sidewalks. We wouldn't want to go outside every day and find the world a different place, and find it where you had to relearn who you could trust and who you couldn't, and who was a good person, who was a bad person. We tend to like the idea of having dependable structure, and anything that threatens that is felt as a negative through this conditioning mechanism. So anyway, the simple mechanism of our consciousness is this idea that these things are tied to feelings. So I could say that if you losing a loved one, okay, so love is a tricky word, something you're attached to in your environment, that's always experienced as a negative, this familiar thing, this thing that was a guidepost or was always in your life, something, a crutch of a sort, but it's like having your front yard being there, or the roads you travel on, and if they were threatened or taken away, you'd feel a loss, that you've lost a part of your world, and that's, I guess, how it is with people and such. And so the general theme I'm trying to get to is that there are events that are really, really strongly conditioned, where it's even your personal experience. So let's just go through some of those you could have. You have an illness, or you have a disability, or you associate with snakes and they bite you and you get terribly sick and you almost die. Your revulsion to snakes is probably going to be greatly intensified. You have threatening environments, say bears. You're in a trailer in Yellowstone Park and bears rock your trailer back and forth, and you almost rip the siding off and almost kill you. You might end up with a negative association between for bears. Their threateningness might be more real to you, be more visceral. You'll feel it. So you have these events where you've had bad times in your life. You've had an excessive amount of negative feelings, either caused by something or caused internally, but ends up being associated with something. So let's say you fly in a plane and it just happens that you have the flu and you're really sick and you just have a lousy flight and your head aches and it's horrible and unpleasant. So it's not really the plane's fault, but it's going to get blamed because you're going to have a bad time, and the bad time gets attached to the event. And so that's basically the mechanism of conditioning, is associating things with things. And so what color shirt the girl who breaks your heart. So you spend a year just really desiring a girl, and you finally get the courage to ask her out, and she's wearing a blue sweater that day, and then she says something just really devastating, like, "Oh, you're short and ugly, and fuck you. Who do you think you are even asking me?" Something just devastating. Now maybe the color blue is going to be associated with this very negative emotional time you're having. And again, like this happens with physical pain as well as emotional pain. And we associate the things in the environment at the time of the event of the feelings. So it might even be a couch material. Lots of things can, rub us the wrong way, in the sense that we had a bad experience in a certain kind of circumstance, and now that anything that has the smell, the flavor of that circumstance, anything that's associated with it will now be problematic. Will give us frightmares and such. And even that can be an interesting part of this, is just how movies maturate us. Movies you see as a kid, some of them, it was my experience anyway, that some of them did give me trauma about certain things. I became afraid of certain things based on movies, because I took the movies a little more seriously, because as kids you tend to do that. You think of the threats as more real, and you end up associating even people's names or the kind of name with the actor, with this, with that, all these associations, and you just tend to carry that through your life, these kind of little subtle associations where certain things are going to be associated with very negative experiences in your life. And also the inverse would be that if your house is on fire and you're getting burned, and then the fireman comes to rescue you, you might end up loving the color yellow, and then the name, Juan Hernandez or something, whatever his name is. These things will be positively associated, and so you'll have a whole collection of this. The control mechanism is essentially being programmed through your maturation and through your life, but there is a truth to the fact that what you learn in your youth, how you learn when you're young, is very different than how much you can learn as you get older. It's clear kids can learn languages when they're young. They can do lots of things that are much harder to do the older you get. So clearly this conditioning is harder and harder to break and to rewrite brain space as you get older. It just becomes more rigid in terms of its mutability, changeability based on some new experience, some new reconditioning. The new tricks are hard to learn. And so there's a bias towards your initiation into the world. So I could argue that the bias towards religion might be because it is indoctrinated in youth, and people just keep trying to find ways to rationalize that youthful conditioning, something like that. And so they vacillate through their life, even though their logic tells them one thing, their emotions are telling them something else, and they can't necessarily break that conforming to those original intuitive conditioned responses. So so we're getting there. So the point is this: your consciousness has this function. So the flavor of things ends up bleeding into things. If I ever think about the deaths I've seen, the ones I've witnessed, I can think I will associate. It'll be very negative associations, in the sense that most of them are bad. Lots of suffering involved, lots of puking or some other kind of just really unpleasant things to witness happening to somebody or something, and very difficult to even think about, even imagine, even remember. The memories are in themselves unpleasant to revisit. And those things are associated with a whole pack of words, like the word death, sickness. All kinds of words are tied to those experiences that the ones we personally experience and the ones we have to witness. Because the ones we witness are always converted into something that's part of our possession, part of the world that we're attached to. Our favorite pen, our favorite cat, our favorite dog, our favorite. And those attachments are strong. The love of your siblings and your parents and this kind of thing. The people that were there for the firemen who rescued you, the group of people who have been around you and protected you from harm, or gave you comfort when you were in trouble and all that kind of stuff. The ones you have these positive associations with in your conditioning. And they're associated with certain words and certain colors and certain environments inside your subconscious. There's these connections. These little neurons are connecting these different chains of imagination, chain of memory. So if I say blue-green algae to you, your brain will take that concept and run it through the connections. and you'll say, okay, 8th grade science, and then you'll connect it to the colors of green and red because you heard that there's some algae that's red, and there'll be all these different little connections, and it might get you to, it'll take two different people to two very different places, and it might take you to a different place each time you hear the word, because your brain has it floats a lot of the whole vocabulary of your brain. The vocabulary has a strength and weakness. Certain words are dominant words for a week or a month. You'll see that in yourself. You'll pick up a phrase and you'll use the phrase, all the time for a few days in a row, and it's like you almost can't help yourself using the word. I've been using the word preposterous for like 2 years. A preposterous amount of times I say preposterous. And I've just noticed that how this word somehow floated up into my psychology, and now it tends to just go with this word, preposterous. Well, that same thing happens with different concepts of harm, different ideas of bad things or bad experiences, colors. You can just have a color that's a dominant color in your head, and so when you're doing your associations, the associations are going to tend to go with these words that are on the short list, the strong list of the algorithm your brain's using, that's called its vocabulary. So there's strong words in your vocabulary and ones that have become weak, in the sense that you have to go look for them and find them. They're not right available. They're not on the easy access memory. So that'll change what you'll think when I say the same exact words today or tomorrow or a year from now. The same exact phrase will mean something slightly different, or maybe substantially different, depending on when you hear it. The word Trump, for example, meant very little 3 years ago, and now it means, apocalypse. It's just been changed into a completely different neurological reaction because of all the associations and the declarations made by the brain in terms of thinking and feeling, having very many connections to Trump meaning, coat hanger abortions, Trump meaning lower wages, Trump meaning lots of things that I associate with very negative consequences to sensitive feeling organisms. The lack of regulation, environmental destruction, so many things that this crazy person will cause in the world, and all those associations are primarily negative. The only good thing is, okay, a few less foreigners babbling nonsense, maybe a few less Muslim kooks, religious kooks, but more Catholic kooks and more Christian kooks, so it's almost a wash on the kook list. But yeah, very few positives, a ton of negatives, and that's my mental association at this point in time. And if I were to predict 4 years from now, I'll have much of those fears will be realized, and the negative will be even stronger, because there'll be real world destructions and breaking of the social progress that will be more obvious and visible. Maybe a lack of a social security system, more expensive health care, certainly for poor people. So all of that you can understand that this is how the world changes. The associations change because the events have changed, and you witness things happening, and you witness threats coming. You can see the Nazi guns, on the embankments as your little boat is heading for the shore, and you can know what's coming. You can know what you're in for, and you have the appropriate sensations and associations. So that's the mechanism in brief. And I mean, I could draw a picture of it. I mean, I started to, but it's almost like it's not necessary. because I think you could understand that, you know, blue pen can be associated to red pen. Red pen is the color of blood. Blood can be associated with what you saw on the ground when your best friend was shot. Then you start thinking about his last dying moments and spitting them out through the blood, gurgling and, you know, suffocating. And these have become very negative associations. So blue pen ends up being tied to a very negative association, even though it's not really the blue pen's fault. It's just the way your connections are going to work. And there are checks and balances against that, because obviously your brain can recognize that the blue pen doesn't have much to do with this, and you can recognize your brain has drifted, you know, to an extreme, and that, whoa, it changed the subject. And then you can say, well, that's a change of the subject. Stop thinking about that and just realize it's a pen. It's for writing. It doesn't have anything to do with that whole. It doesn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. See, even though the pen can remind you of the Holocaust, you can see something on there and says it looks like a yarmulke, and then yarmulke you say Jew, and Jew, concentration camp, blah blah blah. This is the way our brain associates, and it's always, and so as it's associating, as it's connecting these thoughts, these memories, these little pieces of memory, little tiny hunks of a image, they're connected to a feeling, and it's how many, it's when you connect to these dark memories that you have the deepest and hardest feelings, and the memories that get to your core, which are the ones that you're most vulnerable on, the ones where you had the most humiliation, or felt the sickest, or, you know, where you're most vulnerable. And those are obviously the ones that are just really bad. And so anything that ends up getting you there is going to end up just being, fuck that pen, I'm getting some other pen. I like this pen better, because I don't like that one. It's not that this pen's better. It's just that it's not that fucker. That one reminds me of negative things. This one I don't have any negative feelings towards. I don't have any negative associations that my brain is making today anyway. Maybe tomorrow it'll be a different pen. But it's just associations, and all through these associations, all it's bleeding in is this value impression of the sensation. The sensations of positive butterfly connected to the negative sensations associated with, say, an assassin bug, you know, jabbing another bug and sucking its guts out. You know, we can look at nature and see these two different parts of it: a pretty flower, and then you can see the maggots eating the flesh of a dead squirrel or something. And it's, you know, so you can, it's a mixing bowl of sensations and feelings, and in the end there's a balancing, there's a mechanism inside of you that's balancing those sensations and their strength and how they've been dripped into your consciousness, and your brain will make a decision based on that dripping of, you know, how much there's like two truly complementary colors, in the sense that if they mix in perfect balance, it becomes invisible. And if there's a little more black, then it's black. If there's a little more white, it's white. But that's sort of how the decision is made. There's no real mixing. It's either white, black, or invisible, you know, a neutral. I don't know. And so you have to sit there and wait, because your brain can't. There's lots of times where you run into a circumstance where the decision is too unpleasant. There's a very good, important good to be preserved, and then there's a very negative price to be paid, like jumping on the grenade or something to save your friends. There's a huge value in doing that. There's a huge, I get hero points, I'm a great person, I validate my existence, I make myself very productive very fast. Lots of good reasons, and then there's the bad reasons, which are I get killed and I get blown into bits, and my arms are over there and my legs are over there and my intestines are over there, and it's really ugly and messy, and you know, you know, ooh, nasty, and you know, you're stuck with this balancing act that has to take place, where you have to make, it has to be decided. It's stuck in the invisible territory, and something, you'll have to have some more thoughts that'll have to generate, and maybe you'll just say, well, since I'm indecisive, what's fixes indecisiveness? Courage. So maybe your brain automatically goes to courage, or maybe your brain automatically goes to rationalize a way out. You know, you don't call it retreat, and you don't call it traitor. You just call it something else, like I'm not strong enough. Not today. There's a bigger grenade that needs my attention tomorrow. So, you find a rationalization, or you find courage through just saying, man up, it's like those guys on the mountain, putting the flag up on the dirt hill, ball up, do the right thing. And it's just a mechanism. It's just another program that runs to add a little bit more of this positive or the black or the white color to the weighing process and tip you in the balance of jump on the grenade. So that's what's running us. That's the mechanism. It's just a mechanism of associations, how you've been programmed to associate different things, and a lot of that will be the argument in the third video, is this maturation of memes or ideas or knowledge. And we do have knowledge of these concepts like honor, like integrity, these positive values, and we do have knowledge of how the world runs, what's happening in the world, the idea that my pain isn't the only pain in the world, and all of that kind of stuff. And all of that has a way of associating through very negative and positive ways, and that we can have very negative association with lies and deceit and rationalizations and cheats and selfishness, and then we can understand the honor and dignity of honoring the truth, doing the best we can, getting the most out of ourselves in terms of our productivity, that your life isn't just your life is your influence on everybody else in the lifeboat. The quality of the whole cast is what's important, not the quality of one individual. You can all understand the idea that one happy emperor and a million miserable peasants is not a good equation, and that kind of knowledge can create very positive associations in your brain about what kind of influence you're going to be in the world and what you're going to be motivated to do, and how you're going to think, how you're going to associate. Thinking is just associating. And do you associate through logical chains, reasoning chains that are written by eloquent people who respect the truth and the facts, and can say something like, well, I was thinking of Dawkins' Selfish Gene, which was the book he keeps trying to retitle, which was quite appropriately titled in some respects. And then the fact that he wrote another book called The Greatest Show on Earth, which is, maggots eating squirrels, and calling that a great show, when, that's about as grotesque as you can get. But again, this is the gameplay of words. It's very important what kinds of words you associate with something, what kind of font you write it in. I can write the word life in, hard-edged, metal-y font, jagged and sharp and teeth-like, or I can write it as puffy clouds and friendly and soft and comforting and warm. And that is just illustrating just how overtly emotional your thinking process is always going to be. And it's just the fact of having these associations be tied to reasoning, where you can actually see the rational chain and say it's appropriate that I would feel bad when something isn't being tortured, and that it would be inappropriate if I feel good when I watch somebody being tortured. That's fucked up. You can understand that that's fucked up, and that can only exist because I have some kind of ego problem or some kind of psychological problem that's making it necessary for me to see victory in somebody else's defeat, or in somebody else's destruction or harm, and that this isn't some sort of more rational process where you can say, yes, I can understand pain is bad when I have it, pain is bad when somebody else has it, and I can understand that some mechanism that's going to cause pain in the world is not going to be a good mechanism. That kind of where your feelings, your emotions match what you would rationally be able to tie together, in terms of the reasoning chain, is consistent with your emotional output. And again, so your truth associations, the associations you have connected to doing just what you call thinking and trying not to feel, versus those where you're feeling and you're not really thinking. And ideally, you'd want those two to match. But there's always the conflict, because the nepotism is hard to get over, the racism is hard to get over, the nationalism is hard to get over. It's hard to get over these the innate aversions built into our physical system, just as it would be difficult for you to get over how your body is innately attracted to sweet things, and how it's reversed by things that are tart or in some way obnoxious, smells. It's very hard for you to just rationally say, I'm smelling the wrong way, I shouldn't think that's a bad smell. So if things actually did have more of a smell association, and you found something like penicillin stank, you could understand that, well, I know penicillins are good, and I know whatever association I have in the sense that it stinks doesn't have anything to do with its good purpose. So it could be like a vitamin can be like that. You can take some mineral or vitamin and it has a horrible taste, but you know it's a good thing. So you still take it even though you find it obnoxious. You can find exercise uncomfortable and irritating and, oh, I got to exercise, and challenging, but you know it's a good, so you do it because you're thinking about all the positives that will be derived through this inconvenience or unpleasantness that you're going to have to endure, going to the dentist, go to the doctor, getting surgery, chemotherapy. We do lots of things that are very unpleasant because we have we keep focused on some better circumstance that will exist in the future. And that is enough to give us the courage to jump on the grenade, so to speak, to do something that's personally not going to be a feel-good experience. But we'll embrace it because we know there's a function or a purpose and that is bigger or better than the momentary inconvenience or even substantial misery. Alright, so that's, I probably don't need to beat it to death, but it's just associations going into a bucket. And the associations are mechanical, like pen. It's just a kind of they both fit into a category. It's not that part doesn't mean too much, but what does mean something is black means something and red means something emotionally. Different elements of this thing are associated with things that will get you to a feeling. And so eventually everything becomes Adolf Hitler, that's bad, and everything becomes chocolate cupcake, that's good. So whatever things you associate with pure good and whatever things you associate with pure bad will tend to be the end consequence of all thinking, because it's all going to tend to go black and white. That's the tendency. The tendency is to make decisions, and that's the nature of the beast. And the tough ones are when you, through reasoning, know one thing to be right, but through innate sensation just can't manifest the strength, the ability to overcome your fear. You're afraid, and fear, people write about such things. It's a powerful emotion. This letting go. Jumping out of the airplane, for example, or doing something else where you have to overcome this substantial apprehension. It's like I did some I used to go swimming every day in the summer for a few years, and when the water was cold, you always went through this process of having to gain the courage to jump in. Now, even your brain knows every time it works out okay, there's really not a problem. It's always difficult when you're standing on the edge of the board to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Initiating yourself into that commitment is always difficult when it's just an idea in your head of a value that you can't feel it because it's not that splendid a sensation. It's not like your body's lying to you. There will be a little bit of a shock in the cold water. It will be a little bit negative. So your body's saying, your brain is doing the right thing in the sense it's trying to protect you from that. But at the same time, you're trying to give it this idea that, well, look, the rest of the swim is going to be fairly good. Now, it's not going to save somebody's life. Now, if you knew it was going to save somebody's life if you jumped in the cold water, it'd be so much easier to jump in the cold water. But it's not a strong positive. It's only a light positive of, oh, we'll have a nice swim. And so the light positive isn't enough to get rid of the immediate negative of, but you're going to get shocked by that cold water. And that's our psychology. Our psychology is just doing that every day with everything that takes place. It's doing this balancing, and it's just basically word associations, and the words, eventually the words associate to Adolf Hitler, whatever that is for you, and concentration camp or something horrible, and those horrible sensations make the decision for you. Association to something fundamentally negative. And that's when you're the most decisive. Is the more you can make something the Adolf Hitler, the more decisive you can be in your reaction to it as a negative, and the more you can associate something with something warm and soft and friendly and perfect, the easier it is to go that way. And again, as I would say in the third video, will be more of a discussion of memes and the actual ideas of the emotional expressions of things like integrity and honesty, the values that we do associate with these fundamentally negative things. We associate like honesty would be anti a disease. Honesty would be a cleanser, something that cleans away the maggots and cleans away the grime and the dirt and the filth. And that's why and having those kinds of associations are what makes a person of better or lesser character. So yeah, that'll be part 3. Anyway, thank you very much, and until next time and such.